this time last year, I had friends, Mr. Hicks here, Diane Hubbard over there behind the table, and members of the Republican State Committee. If you're not into party politics, that's fine, just so you know. You probably think the state chairman runs the state political party. Not true. The state committee hires the state chairman. So that's the highest echelon of Republicanism. Members of the state committee came to me and asked me if I would run against Senator Lugar in 2012. I was stunned, really was. My response to them was largely like this: well, thanks, very kind of you, very nice, very flattering. But what did I do to you? You know, why throw me under a bus like that? And I totally put it out of my mind. And then election day 2010 arrived. And to my utter amazement, we led the ticket, which is to say on election day of 2010, I got more votes than any other person in the state of Indiana. Over 1 million votes. No state treasurer's ever had that happen before. We got more than 100,000 votes in excess of what Dan Coates received in being elected to the United States Senate. And as you know, Dan Coates literally crushed his opponent, wasn't even close. Well, with that election result, I started getting more and more calls. Please, please, run for the United States Senate. And my response was still pretty much the same. But I got so many calls, got pestered by so many friends, I finally said, okay, I'll start to check it out. And as I started to look at Mr. Lugar's record, and by the way, let me say at the outset, I have great respect for Mr. Lugar. I've voted for him many times myself. He's had a distinguished public career. But especially in this most recent lame duck session of the United States Congress, Mr. Lugar went the wrong direction too many times. You see, I had known for some time how he had voted for the 3 most liberal justices on the United States Supreme Court. That was troubling to me. I had known that he had voted for the auto bailouts, certainly being on the other side of that one. That was troubling for me. I was concerned about his vote for TARP, the Troubled Asset Recovery Program. And issue after issue, I found myself having more and more differences. And so I started calling the Republican county chairman around the state of Indiana saying, you know, I haven't decided if I'm going to do this. But if I would decide to do this, I want to know, would you support my candidacy? And I thought if I could get maybe a third of the county chairman to sign on to help me, that would be a real message that I'm not just some crazy, wild-eyed guy out on a self-appointed mission, but it's something that would really reflect the support of many of the real grassroots of our party. To my amazement, we quickly passed 30% of the county chairman signing on to support us, and then 40%, and then 50%, and then 60%, and then 70%. And ultimately, the day before I made my announcement, we had 82% of the county chairman. Now you have to understand, and I've been around politics a long time, I was expecting this. During the last 48 hours, several of them picked up the phone call and said, Richard, you know, I'm really for you, I'm for you, but please don't put my name on that list. Don't release my name. And I said, that's fine. But the day of the announcement, we were still able to release a list that showed 75% of the Republican county chairmen support this candidacy. That is an amazing thing against a 35-year incumbent United States Senator. As I was sharing a few moments ago during the interview, you know, people want to say this is sort of a Tea Party rebellion. With all respect to all of you in the Tea Party, this candidacy is more reflective of a rebellion inside the walls of the Republican Party. Why is it happening? I think in part because there is a grassroots uprising of Tea Party members and of Republicans who look to Washington, D.C. and recognize the system is broken and we don't have much time to fix it. As I look around the audiences that I am privileged to address, night after night, day after day, you know, I see people who have never been necessarily politically active before, but they're stepping forward. People who never want to violate that first rule of etiquette. You know, you never talk to your neighbors about religion and politics. They're setting at least half of that rule aside because they fear for their country. And I tell you, I hate standing here, and I don't want anybody to believe that I'm standing here and I'm somehow trying to gin up your support based on your fear. I hate that perspective of this. Because I don't want you to be motivated just because somebody gives you a bad story. I want you to be motivated because of what you remember. Just yesterday, there was a wonderful editorial in the Wall Street Journal. I don't know if any of you will remember or recognize the name Peggy Noonan. Peggy Noonan was a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush. She wrote those wonderful words that Ronald Reagan used the night the Challenger speech was given after the Challenger exploded. She wrote those wonderful words that he gave at the 40th anniversary of D-Day. She has a way of just getting to the point so perfectly. And in her editorial yesterday, she talked about how those of us, and she and I are the same age, those of us who are baby boomers, and even those who are older than baby boomers, now feel like refugees in America. We didn't move, but we're in a different country. We are in a different country. It's not what we grew up in. It's not the wood that we hoped our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren would live in. You know, I'm a huge student of American history. I don't know how many dozens of books I've read on Mr. Lincoln. I'm honest, humbled as many times as I get to ask, as I'm asked to speak about Lincoln, specifically non-political speech, just about the life of Abraham Lincoln. And I will tell you, one of my favorite Abraham Lincoln speeches was a speech he gave long before he was president. He gave it in 1858. And perhaps somewhat ironically, he gave it the day he announced he was running for the United States Senate. Historians have come to call the speech the House Divided speech. Now, the press totally reported the speech out of context, if you can imagine that, right? The press got it totally wrong. They said the House Divided speech, that Abraham Lincoln was predicting there was going to be a civil war, or even that he was advocating for a civil war. It's far from the truth. The issue, of course, was all about slavery. It was about whether or not slavery would continue to be isolated just in those southern states, or whether slavery was going to expand to the West. And in that context, Abraham Lincoln gave the House Divided speech, and he said this: "The House divided against itself cannot stand. I do not believe the House will fall, but I do believe it will cease in being divided. It will become either all of one thing or all of the other." And of course he meant slavery would be everywhere in the United States, in the North too, in the West, in the South, or it would be totally eliminated. History, of course, proved him correct. What does a House Divided speech from 1858 have to do with 2011 and 12? I think a great deal. We are again a House divided. 47% of all American households pay no income tax. None. And indeed, half of them almost get money back from the government through the Earned Income Tax Credit. We get the benefits, all of us, of living in this incredible country. And then only 53% of the households are paying the tab. Let me put it in a more graphic way. When Navy SEAL Team 6 did its work a few weeks ago, it didn't just do it for the 53% of us paying the bills. It did it for every American. And yet, as long as we are that house divided, nearly half of the American population could care less what the cost of government is. They could care less about the very issues that motivate you, even to the point of individual liberty, because they're getting by. They don't have what we like to call skin in the game. And that very act, I think, is going to continually perpetuate and divide Americans unless it changes. But I don't believe the House will fall either. But I do believe it will cease in being divided. And that's why 2012 is so important. We are either going to go in the direction of the European-style socialist nations, which I think is clearly the plan of the administration, or I believe we will begin to go back to a more traditional role of America, the type that Peggy Noonan was referring to, where there is a greater sense of individual responsibility and freedom in looking after yourselves. Doesn't mean we're isolated from government, doesn't mean we're anarchists. It simply means that we look to ourselves more than we look to government. You know, when your treasurer was speaking up here a few moments ago, quoted Oliver Wendell Holmes. It was Oliver Wendell Holmes who said something once that later got picked up by a 20th century politician. Dare I say, plagiarized. What Oliver Wendell Holmes once said was, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Do you think those 47% would buy into that expression today? And all of you know that it was John Kennedy in 1961 who gave the quote that I just gave you, that he took from Mr. Holmes. That's how dramatically our country has changed in the last 50 years. And the question is, where do we go from here? Just a couple quick words on the debt crisis, and it is that. And then I'll throw this open for questions.